Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Appreciate it. I'm Joel Heusinger.
I'm Audrey Svane.
And
Tom King.
there you go. We got the three of us.
Nice to see you all again.
Bad draw, I know, right after lunch. But anyway, Audrey and I work at Woods Aitken Law Firm. We both specialize in construction law. That's basically all I've done probably for a number of years. Audrey says I can stop counting after 35, so I will. Anyway, Audrey is one of our new partners at the firm, so we're excited about that. She's been with us about 8 years, and she tries to keep me in line, and doesn't always work either. But that's right. And then obviously Tom with Gene Lilly is one of our partners that we've really enjoyed working with. Tom and Jake and Jim and Seth, and appreciate them having us on board for this program off of here. So
I think I'm on board your program, but I appreciate the intro and the vote of confidence, Joel. So,
there you go.
Thank you. And everybody, you may notice we did actually have a camera for one time, and a little bit because of COVID, a little bit because of everything that people have going on. We had some people ask, can I get a copy of the presentation? Can you just film it or something or whatever? So we're going to try and figure out the best way to get it. I don't think we're going to start ourselves the Tom, Joel, and Audrey YouTube channel anytime soon. But I wouldn't mind if we could get it to anybody that says, hey, I was thinking back through that and there was something, some point in there that I would like to re-listen to. So thank you very much for bearing with us. And I don't think I'm going to make this a standard issue part of the Gene Lilly attire, but here we are today, right? So. Gene Lilly Surety Bonds, we've been around since 1965. You've probably all ran into either us, one of us, somewhere around the surety world. Pretty well known face amongst this crowd here. So thank you very much for coming. We see the connection between what a lot of times people call it your circle of advisors, your sphere of influence, or whatever the colloquialisms are. But really in the contracting world, contractors, the root word of that, of course, is contract. It's probably the most important part of the whole equation from an outbound business arrangement, and that's where Joel and Audrey have been such valuable teammates in practical application of what goes on every day. So that's why our teams have really kind of settled in together as a good co-associates. So thank you.
And we've been around since 1921. I have not been there the whole time, but close. So anyway. But we just celebrated our 100th year anniversary, so we were kind of excited by that, and so that was a big milestone for us. But a lot of our specialty is in construction law, both here. We have a large office in Denver, Omaha, and then a small satellite office in DC. But we wanted today to kind of get right to the heart of a matter that we think is continuing to just be a real issue in construction. It started a little bit with the pandemic back in 20, and we all, I think, at least from our standpoint, thought, hey, you make it 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, 3 months, and this all will be just fine, and everybody go back and reset. In reality, I think it introduced us to a whole another way of the way things are going to be going, and introduced to supply chain issues, other shortages, ways things were going to be handled, and then compound that with what appears to be some pretty strong indicators that inflation's going to be around, and some higher numbers have been coming out there. And so what we wanted to do was kind of take a look at all of that and go through that and give you that kind of an overview. What are the current conditions? What are the problems that are created by it? And then what are some potential solutions? So that's really where we want to kind of walk through today, doing that. Price escalation. Don't know that we have to say a lot about it, but we wanted to give you a few statistics. I feel bad being right in the middle. I'm going to come over here and you, Audrey, scoot over. This is bad. I know. They didn't give us the remote, so we're working on that. But anyway, our price escalation is really one of the things that's driving all of this, the mayhem that we're seeing in the purchase orders. And I think it's continuing to grow. We have some statistics that we've given you in the handout as well. But if you look at it, the escalations, and it's resulting in all kinds of problems of deliveries to a job site, ending up in delays, ending up in issues there. And I don't know, Tom, if you're seeing the same thing from
Certainly.
the people that you have.
Yeah, I know we really are, and it's, one of the things that I subscribe to countless blogs and surety guys and contractor guys, and one of the ones talked about in the redecoration by inflation. It was just a piece that I was pulling some information from, and he was commenting that between March 2020 and July 21, steel prices were up over 200%, and traders don't see that easing until 22. But even then, I think, yeah, we're going to have to build a bunch of infrastructure, and also we're competing for steel with other global economies that are also going like this. China's consuming as much as they can. There's so many other areas of the world that are also clamoring for the same input costs or input products that end there. So anybody that says, oh, this will all calm down in the next 6 months is not really probably being honest with themselves. And I think that one of the things to remember always in this application is the supplies that we're talking about that impact what our contractor customers and friends purchase. Their suppliers are also having a tough time getting supplies. It's the raw input materials, it's the competition for further down the supply chain. So all those costs, I mean, the slide here, I think the number one thing, if we could put shortages of, it'd be, of course, people up there at the highest level. There's supplies that people have sitting somewhere they can't get moved because for the same reason we can't find operators and drivers, the supply house can't find somebody to drive the truck to ship the doors over here. That's just it. So I think the cost of everything going up is exactly apparent, and I think it's only going to continue.
Right. And statistically, like I said, you see here's just some more that we've given price changes for construction and selected materials. And I thought this was an interesting slide from the AGC national team. And what it shows is the differential between the bid price going up and the actual inputs to construction going up. And I think everybody can see the pretty big gap that's taking place there. And again, given what we're seeing in the market right now and frankly in our country with regard to inflation, you've seen a number of recent, I think, organizations coming out saying, we've tried to absorb the price increases as long as we can. We can't do it anymore. We have to pass it on to consumer or to end user. And so I think you're going to see that trend go up. And the question is, how close will those get, or how far apart will that get between bid prices going out and the commodities that are being purchased for it? I thought this is, again, an interesting statistic in the period of time in which the change in cost exceeded the change in bid price. And again, all it's saying is the costs are going up much, much higher than contractors or people being able to put bid prices out there to cover. And so what does that all, end up doing? Creates kind of the situation that we're in right now, that you're seeing. I will tell you that we probably get average at least a call a week.
A couple calls a week.
Couple calls a week that are on exactly this situation. Hey, we bid X. Situation is now the supplier says, manufacturer got nothing for us for the next 6 months. What do we do? How do we handle it? And we're going to start looking at that. But I would just tell you from our standpoint, from construction law world, we get those inquiries all the time. And I'm sure you're hearing a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah, it's extremely routine in our business, of course, as well.
So
just be thankful you aren't vertical building contractors that have to source garage doors and windows and all the other goofy stuff that's drawn by an architect to be put into a building and then found and sourced, and then they can't get it. So it's pretty bad everywhere.
Yeah. And you're seeing this, you're having delays from the material shortages, seeing the increased cost. I think what we've seen a lot of is the unreliability, the inability to predict delivery times is what makes a big deal. And then compensation, not always tied in your contract to price escalation. And again, that's one of the things we're going to talk a little bit about. Obviously, owners want to pay original contract price. How do you tie it in? What can you do? What do you do if the escalation occurs, after bid submission? What if it occurs 3 days after contract signing? What are ways you can try to deal with that?
And as Joel said, we're getting quite a few calls on this particular issue right now. One of our favorite things as attorneys to turn to is the contract. But what we're finding is a lot of contracts for ongoing projects either don't cover this or they do put the risk completely on the contractor. So we don't have a lot of leverage when it comes to the contract documents for ongoing projects. But what we'll talk about later today are some contract provisions in the handout that you could incorporate into new projects, hopefully, to give you a little bit more leverage. Because right now it seems like, because this is still a pretty new issue, it's not being currently addressed in the contract language that we're seeing.
And I realize that a big chunk of you have, some dealing with the NDOT, obviously, and the standards contract provisions. But I would tell you, even in that, before the job begins, I would ask a lot of questions. I would put out a lot of communications. I think you're going to hear us say that, ad nauseum here, is that communicate, communicate, communicate. Do you want us literally, and I'm going to probably say it again, but do you want us to price a contingency in our bid price for escalation of A, B, and C? Now, they may say, hey, that's entirely up to you, but I would put it on the table. I mean, one of the things we're trying to do is to let owners know. This is typical how the change condition clause got into effect with the federal government contracting and then to states and locals. But the reason for a change condition clause was because owners didn't want to price a contingency every time they bid a job that a contractor may run into underground conditions that were different than what was anticipated. Because what contractors would do is say, if this burden is all on me for underground differing conditions, I'm going to put a 25% multiplier on. And so I'm going to have that. And so owners said, well, my God, I'm paying this every time and they're not hitting it. Why am I getting a bump all the way around? So they put in a differing condition clause which says, if you do encounter this, we'll track that separately and I only pay for what you hit. Well, what I think is one of the things to deal with these kind of escalation issues is to have the same conversation with the owner. And again, I realize everybody's got your own business judgment calls and your own provisions and everything else, but I'm just telling you, communicating up front and letting them know that there is contingency that's being put in because of these escalation items that could occur. That's something that owners don't necessarily want to price if it doesn't happen. What if it does come down by the time you order the materials? Well, the owner gets a higher price than what they may have otherwise had off of there. So those are some things that we talk about in saying the communication, and you get into the details there of saying, hey, if the price goes above 5%, are you willing to consider an escalation slider after that? Right? I'll eat first what's typical in our industry, but after that, otherwise, do you want me to price that in my unit prices? I will, and they say, well, you may or may not get the job. I get it. As the attorney, sometimes on those jobs, I would tell you, you may not want that job if the escalation is going to go up 40% and you're only going to be able to cover X, right? So those are the things that we think people should look at as we're going through here.
Yeah, and I think our next slide, if we can hop over one more, kind of references that to the idea of talking with everybody that's involved in the project, because I think what we're trying to get to, or hope people can, everybody can get to, is a win-win on a project, both for the owner and the contractors. Because at this point, when it's a supply chain issue, it just won't get done. You can't yell your way into having something show up that's just not available, and so the owner can't push terribly hard at the contractor level and say, well, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire and we're going to charge you LDs. Well, great, I can't get it. It's just not possible. So we got to find a way to win this thing together and work together. And this means everybody that's from the engineering team to the owner to the contractor to the subs, and that's where this cooperation, communication, collaboration, it's really one of the only ways when you're dealing with a finite pool of resources that costs are going up, or it can be handled. And we're talking about supply chain, of course, but there's multiple things that are all going into that. And it's kind of one of those things that's easy to lose track of where all the daggers are coming from in this moment, because it's been a lot in the last couple of years. And then there's also organizations that are continuing to follow that pace of rise in cost. But it is a supply chain disruption. It is a skilled labor shortage, and it is inflation that's causing, I mean, let's be honest about how much money we printed in the last 2 years and injected it into the economy. That's going to drive inflation dollars up a lot. a lot of projects started then and may still be going now. So the project that was priced 2 years ago is still going on now, and anybody that's buying on-the-spot materials to go into it are probably thinking, Jesus, I had no idea. How would you ever expect the price of materials to be now what they were when you priced the job originally? So that's where that really tough to get that into something that's underway, but going forward, that collaboration and communication, the joint savings clause ideas, anything that you can get to get the owner to say, hey, I understand, we got to work together because I want this project done. They want it completed. They probably understand that contractors make money. I think that's a good thing. It's good for the community. It's good for the contractor, obviously. But really, what's the owner want? They want their project done. They wouldn't have started if they wanted to argue with you forever. So I think the final bullet point on here, the amount of money that everybody keeps talking about spending on infrastructure, and frankly is needed. If you look at what the bridges and roads status are throughout the state of Nebraska, there's a lot of appetite for expansion and repair. That's only going to continue to drive this stuff. And so getting out in front of it in communication with the ownership saying, hey, whether it's the Department of Transportation, your local community, your city council, whoever you're working for, saying, hey, here's exactly what we're working with right now. I want to find a way to bring you guys a great project, but I also need your buy-in on a few things here, because if we have to price these crazy swings, it's not going to be good for any of us here. So it's that win-win collaboration. So the next piece, of course, is that the kind of looking back as to how did we get to this point. We all pretty much understand just-in-time delivery systems. It's fantastic. The leanest way, just show up with your material at the time. That worked well before everything stopped, because the supply chain isn't just your local vendor like we were talking earlier. It's got so many more inputs that are so far back. So we all know this, we all get it, but the producing countries, they're trying to take away stuff that we're needing to produce our stuff. So China is trying to get iron ore. Maybe they're producing their own, maybe they're not buying ours. Regardless, there's just so much global demand and pull that it's what's creating this issue. And really going down into the shipping and logistical woes, that's also something that I never really thought it would be reasonable to think that you couldn't get ships unloaded out of harbor because you couldn't get trucks to offload them to, that couldn't then unload a shipping container, that they couldn't reload with something else and deliver to Nebraska. But I think we're in that stage right now. And one of the unfortunate things is, in a political backdrop, there's a lot of emphasis on green new deals, green energy, whatever. They're cutting down on the number of trucks that are allowed to be put on the road because of emissions ratings. You guys know all this stuff. They're cutting down on the number of EPA licenses that they're going to be willing to extend to organizations that are trying to use this to produce raw input materials. So staying out in front of your supply chains is going to be really important, saying, hey, how can we make sure we secure this? So we'll move on to the next one.
So solutions. This is the part that y'all have all been waiting for. So contract clauses. Instead of going through a bunch of different contract clauses via the slides, what we've done is put together some clauses in a handout that could be helpful for, again, future projects. We know it's too late for ongoing projects. Something to just draw your attention to. Consensus Docs has an addendum that you can use on current projects. So if you get to a point where there's some change in the price of materials, or there's going to be significant delay because you can't get a hold of materials, it kind of lays out a framework for trying to deal with those changes. It's a good starting point, at least for discussion purposes. Another thing that Joel was talking about earlier is that bilateral agreement where the owner gets to save in cost savings if the price of materials goes down. That might be a good suggested contract provision you can use, because the owner's more likely to accept it, right, if there's something in the deal for them as well. So look through those contract provisions. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to Joel or I or Tom and talk with us about it. But that's a good starting point for ways to try to deal with this issue in your contracts moving forward.
Yeah, and again, we realize that from, NDOT has their own set of regs and specs. Get that you're not going to change that, but even the information in the contract clauses are some ways to have some discussions about the escalation issue, okay? And again, as Tom said, the goal is to get the project built. The goal isn't just to beat the crap out of everybody. The goal is to get the project built, and it's got to make sense for everybody to get that done. So there's got to be practical ways to do that. And so even if you're not able to, quote, insert these provisions, you need to have the discussion. You need to make sure, how are we going to accommodate that? Or are you truly expecting me to price the contingency for the next year on proposed 7.5% inflation, on, that we can't get trucks or truck drivers from California to wherever to here? And is that what we're going to do? Or is there a better way that we can handle it similar, as the way the fuel escalation was handled? And the department met, and I think met with representatives of contractor community, and was able to come up with something that made sense there. And I think that's what we've been talking about, is a collaborative effort in order to do that. Now, for municipalities, for counties, for other public work, I think you do have a better chance at trying to put in some of these clauses. And again, not that you're trying to, I got to get out of jail free card. If that's the attitude, everybody's going to, it's going to spiral out of control pretty quick, all right? The goal is to be able to say, look, here's what we're seeing, here's the problem that's causing in pricing, here's some provisions that we think may get us a starting point to that we could maybe deal with that. Does it make sense? All right? And that's what we would encourage people to do. And again, even when you're sending in, before you're sending in your bid, before you're creating your proposals, I would send in all kinds of questions with regard to that. I think it's important to get their attention, or to have the meetings. And again, I'm not trying to just PO anybody. I'm truly collaborative on how do you want to address this solution, because there's a great project to do here. We know that, but here are the issues that we're facing. I think those are some of the things we look at in that regard.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And that conversation, I was at an organization that has a project preview, and the engineers all have their tables out there, and everybody can come and talk to them about what projects they have coming up. And I really think we got to think about it as a group of contractors that got to turn that table a little bit, where the contractors sit at the table and the engineers come with a list of projects and say, what does it take for us to be able to work together on this? Because I got a list of things I need you to build that's a mile long, and I know you got a problem finding enough help, finding enough material, so what can we put into it for material that you can get? And that's where all this type of clauses at that moment, once that table has kind of been leveled for each other to find the same way to get the project built, can occur.
Yeah, and to me, these are probably the most standard section of clauses that at least Audrey and I see it. I assume you're seeing the same thing, that it's, do you have a price escalation clause at all? Well, certain of the documents, like a consensus doc, may have that in there, or an EJCDC, some of the forms, but a lot of times they won't. But there's clauses available that you can put in that are, again, industry created, so they've attempted to be fair and attempted to have some kind of sharing arrangement. A force majeure, in the last 2 years, people have probably had more focus on more force majeure than I've seen in the 35 years prior to that time in going through there. I think it's still significantly in play. From what you hear from, and we've talked about this, but even the current administration, whether we agree or don't agree, not the issue, but they're stating inflation, supply chain, all of those kind of issues are a result of pandemic still, and when we get through pandemic, this will all revert back to normal, whatever normal is. Okay, in those situations, then that may still be part of a force majeure, and what you're asking for is then time on the job, waiting for it to get back to normal. Now, the owner may say, my God, I can't do that. Well, not me. Listen to what's going on in the economy and everything else. That's what they're saying. But those are some issues that go up, because force majeure clause in and of itself doesn't give you a right to money. Okay? It gives you a right to time. And so that's why there's a little bit of difference there that we have to be careful about, because a lot of contractors would say, well, it's just a force majeure event. It's not my fault. I should get paid for it. You got 2 out of 3. It's a force majeure event. It's not your fault. But the payment part is where it comes in, all right? And that's the problem that a lot of people aren't drawing together. An allowance clause is something we've used now with the materials. If there's really volatile material market, you may say, look, I'm putting an allowance in for rebar because of X, or petroleum-based issues because of Y. That's why I'm putting those as allowance. And then you have typical with contingency clauses, what may take place there. It's a contingency if we use it or lose it, and that goes to what Audrey was talking about a sharing arrangement off of there. If it's not used, okay, we can do X, we can do give backs and try to make it fair. And again, as Tom's been saying, a win for everybody.
It's a win-win. One question I've got, and this force majeure, act of God, force of nature, never could have seen it coming. Is that a fair representation of that principle?
Yeah, I think, again, without fault of what I call reasonable fault of the two parties that are in play.
Does it have to be a very proximately close to win? Because I hear people throw force majeure or COVID. Like, well, you didn't see it coming? You haven't known about COVID for 2 years? At what point does that lose its luster when somebody goes to somebody and says, hey, I never saw this coming? Like, well,
it's gotten a lot more difficult to use force majeure as an argument because we know COVID's out there. We know supply chain
at this point, going forward on the contract, some of these things that would have been protections for contractors are going to be very difficult to argue because the owner's going to say, well, you didn't see the price going up?
Right. For new projects, I think you're absolutely 100% correct. I think that's why emphasis is on projects that you're involved with now, where you may have issues that are there. I think you could still look at these and say, yeah, I didn't see the fact that we had a pandemic even in 2020, meaning that I couldn't get trucks from California to Nebraska.
Fair.
Is that an unexpected event that people would tie back to all of that? And I would tell you, I think a lot of people, again, may not believe everybody that says it or not, but there's a lot of industry people out there, and I'll say industry experts, that say, yeah, it's all linked together. Okay. If that's the case, that could be for an ongoing project where this results from. Now, as far as a new project going forward, I think you're dead in the water on trying to say you didn't anticipate pandemic issues now. That's why we are so intent on you seeing at least some other contract clauses you could consider for those, because at this time, not being prepared for a pandemic, probably not a force majeure event, unless there's some raging new strain, and I'm not telling you it can't happen, and I'm not telling you it can't disrupt everything again. Again, none of us thought, well, maybe somebody here did. I can tell you in March of 2020, I did not think in February of 22 that we still have a mask mandate, right? And we're doing all this other stuff. With all this stuff we're going on. I just telling you, I don't think anybody did. Dreamed of it, right? I don't think we did. So could something else happen that would tilt the tables again? Yeah. So anyway.
And then these are just a few additional legal remedies or legal arguments we can make, even if you don't have certain provisions in your contract. They're difficult to make though, and as Tom just mentioned, the more that this pandemic goes on, the longer this lasts, the longer the impacts from the pandemic go on, the more difficult it is for us to argue that you couldn't have expected these issues at the beginning of the project. So finding ways to address these issues in your contract are really important because we're running out of arguments at this point in time.
Yeah, the more we know, the harder it is to say it's not my fault, right? I mean, let's just be honest. That's why today, you all know price escalation is like this. You all know supply chain is a crapshoot, and you all know something else may happen in the pandemic world. While we don't know exactly what it is, you should be aware of it by 2 years, right? So those are going to be hard for us to say, gosh, Judge, not my fault, or gosh, Mr. Owner, not my fault. Okay.
Yeah, and when you're going to the local county, if you're working for your local community, you're working for a city council somewhere, you'd think, well, they should know that too. Jesus, they're in the world with us. They might not. And if you don't ask for it, you'll never get it.
Yeah. Definitely.
So practical solutions. Outside of reviewing your contract, what can you do? And as we've mentioned, and we'll continue to mention, collaborate, provide notice every step of the way, upstream and downstream notice as issues come up. Request change orders, even if you think you're not going to get it. If you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. And you got to create a record, right? You got to show that you were asking for extensions of time or additional money. If you're not asking for it and not creating a record, then again, it makes it harder for us to make arguments at the end of the project that you're entitled to that money or that you should be given time extensions.
Yeah, and I'd like, it'd be nice to tell you, gosh, here's a get out of jail free card. We have 6 cases that have been resolved in the state of Nebraska or in the Midwest that tell you what the result's going to be for all of these issues. Not even close. Got nothing. I don't mean it wrong. There are a few cases with regard to COVID that have come out in general. Most of those initially dealt with insurance coverage for business interruption, okay? And most of those didn't fare very well. There's been some others where the courts have acknowledged that it is a force majeure event, okay, a pandemic of this nature when it first started, and you had the lockdowns and everything else that was going on throughout the country. But again, as that's progressed, those have lost any muster, and really there hasn't been clear guidance given as to how courts are going to look at things. That's why when we talk about this, the collaboration, I know in some regards it probably sounds like a cop-out from quote, you guys are supposed to be the industry experts in legal and everything else. But I would tell you that it's construction law is hard enough when everything's the way we expect. I will tell you, judges have a hard time with it. They just don't understand critical path method schedule. They don't understand the differing site conditions all clearly. They just don't understand a lot of those things as far as quantity overruns and all of that we go through, and repricing after 120. Just like, Judge Nelson still tells me it was, I had a month-long jury trial in front of her less than, I think, 3 months after she was first appointed, and she goes, God, I learned a lot in that case. I'm like, oh, great. That's just what my client wanted me to hear, is that I spent a month in a jury trial with the NDOT. We got to the end, and we got money. And
Did you bill her for that?
Yeah, that's what I said, Judge.
The judge paid for it, for that education?
I'm just telling you, it's hard enough without all of this. So when you add this layer to it, it really becomes difficult, which is why we go back to collaboration and communication. We had one matter that it's what I told the contractor. Contractor gets a call from subcontractor that says, my supplier says roofing material's not coming. Why? Because major manufacturer of roofs, you would all know it if I said it, just said, I know you have a purchase order. Not happening. We're in the Gulf and we're not sending it. If you want the roof, though, we can send you the roof material if you sign a change order for $286,000. Everybody else, it seems to seem like blackmail. Yeah, seemed like it. Now, does anybody have a good solution to that? Could we go sue this company? The supplier would have to sue the manufacturer. The sub would have to sue the supplier. The general would have to sue the sub. The owner would have to sue the general. Now, there's a couple people in here who would be happy.
There's still no roof yet, right?
Audrey's got, this is number 2 for Audrey, so she understands. I have 4 daughters, so, as a dad, I thought at some point they move on. I was wrong. It's okay. That's on me. That's a dad issue. I get it. But, so we would be happy in that scenario, but that didn't make many of you happy, okay? I get it. So I talked to the general. I said, sit down with the owner and say, if you want this facility, and the whole goal was obviously to get it closed in before winter. Right? This was happening in October of last year. Need to work something out between the supplier, the sub, the general, and the owner. And they did. They sat down and they split up some pricing and they split up timing and they did everything else. And you know what? Paid the blackmail. And everybody reserved their rights to go after Mr. Bad Boy Manufacturer if they chose to do so. But the goal was to get the project moved forward. Now, I realize that's not always the case with $286,000. That's a lot of money. That's a big pop to go through. So I get it, but in that case, they were able to work something out, which in my view saved probably, 2 years of just a mess of a legal battle that would have gone on.
And still no roof.
Right. And in the meantime, the project's not done.
Nobody's winning in that moment. Some people are winning.
Well, let's not go with no win. Let's not be so quick to say no win.
So there is a win, but maybe not the one everybody started with.
That's right. The
referee won.
Should be a win-win, but at least the attorney should win no matter what.
We could add a win to that, make it 3 wins.
That's right. So anyway, these other items up here, when we start looking at them, practical solution, are material substitutions available? That's another thing that we've looked really hard at. And again, that's where you try to get the engineer in play and try to get the cooperation again. And don't just tell me no, all right? I get that's what you specified, but look, here's where we're at. Can we work together? Here's what I've gotten about material X, or a different way to build it, or a different, those are things that I think we're seeing at least help move this to get the project done and moving forward.
Yeah, well, and one of the things you were talking about briefly, and I just, you were doing such a good job, I didn't want to interrupt, of course. Talking about magic words, and what's the magic words I can put in this contract so I can get my get out of jail free card? They really don't exist ever. And a presumption that they do will only end up with you in probably jail next to Joel and I. But nonetheless,
it's a fair point.
It's, all the things that you can put into your contract, all the things you can do are more so just building your tool chest of tools. We don't know what kind of bears we're going to find out in the woods, but we better bring a lot of stuff with us. And every one of those that we can get involved into our project as we're going along gives us a better chance of success as we keep moving forward. So I don't know that any one of these is a silver bullet.
Right.
This is on current projects, I know.
Right.
On the next ones, though, we'll find our slide about future projects. So here's our next list of tools to take with us.
Right, and as far as to get out of jail free, that's why Audrey's here, because she's gotten us out of jail many times. So anyway, you understand that. Yeah, you gotta take care of us. But no, this is where, when you're going in now, these are the things you should be looking at and having the discussions with the engineer, with the owner, with your subcontractors and suppliers. That's what we're trying to do, is to get across these items. And is it an option? I mean, I was actually, I know it may shock you that I could actually bring parties together, but I played mediator on Tuesday. I was the mediator, and I had two construction attorneys. I had the city county of a locale that will go without saying, and a large general contractor. And so they had issues going on, and I was able to talk with them. And one of the issues that was still outstanding was there was a bill from a sub for holding material. And I said, what is this all about? And literally the general goes, this is one that really has us puzzled, because they actually were proactive. And when they saw the prices going up, I don't know if you remember, this was for some fixtures, so it won't be anybody here, but for light fixtures in the components in lights, China, there was a big issue that lighting prices were going to go through the roof at that time. And so they sat down with the owner, talked to him about it, and said, look, we know we're not supposed to install them until a year and a half from now, right? And we would normally not ask for, we wouldn't buy them until X, because we would do, but because you have to accept delivery within 30 days of the purchase order going out for these fixtures. They said, are you good with we locking down the price? They're going to deliver them, we'll store them and put them in. Everybody said, yeah. And so they saved, I asked the owner, and both of them, they both agreed, you saved $100,000. The storage cost we were arguing about, one component of this, was $14,500. I'm like, really? Really? You saved $85K and you're not paying the $14,500? Come on now. This one got to go to this side of the ledger. And they're like, that's probably right, Joel. Okay, thank you. I know you're going like, Joel, you got paid to say that? That was really, I need to be a mediator. I get it. But anyway, those are some things, pre-purchase and storing the materials. Can you do that? Is that an option? Can you accelerate the purchases that you have? And then similar, it's part of the problem is it does require more time from your team, particularly to look at material substitutions and possible design revisions. And that just takes more interaction, more coordination, more of the discussions that's going to take place between your subs, your suppliers, the owners, and the engineers off of that. And I think that's a little bit what, when we've talked, you've seen too.
Yeah, certainly it's that communication and what is available versus what do you want. And if you want something that it's going to be very difficult for us to get, let's just talk about something as an alternate.
Right.
Maybe it ain't perfect, but it's going to be done. It's a lot better than an unfinished project.
Right. And when we say look downstream, look, what does the manufacturer have?
Yeah.
Right? For what is the ultimate, as you said, because the suppliers are getting caught because the raw materials aren't there either. So I think what we're saying is it's got to be a more holistic approach to the whole thing and looking at the whole construction process and the supply chain as we're going through that. So those are some things that we've at least seen and tried to put into place.
So the practical part that I get to think about a little bit when we say let's accelerate purchases, pre-purchase inventory, let's get our whole yard full of stuff we're going to use next year. What's that do to cash flow? All of a sudden you got all your money tied up if you can't bill the owner. So then let's think about we're talking to a number of our surety companies we work with, and one of the first ones that one of our groups came up with was realize that if you're buying a bunch of material, your targeted cash flow turnover 30, 60 days from when you buy something to when you pay for it to when you get the bill submitted to when you get your check back from the owner, call it 60, 30, 60, 90, whatever, that's probably going to stretch out quite a bit of time. So let's hope that that communication occurred with the owner and said, hey, I'll buy all this stuff for you, but it's for your job. And I'm not a warehouse, I'm a contractor. So I'm more than happy to store it for you, but I would like you to pay for it because I'm not in the inventory hedging business right now. Now, if you want to be in the inventory hedging business, probably not a bad idea either because as we were talking about, it's going up. But you just got to keep a mind's eye on what does your company's balance sheet look like? Because when the surety guys get a look at what a financial statement has, and they go down the asset column and we see inventory in there, historically there'd be a little bit of an aggressive adjustment to those numbers to calculate what a bond program, what a bank would probably do. I'm not a banker, but what they would do is something similar. Because there's always a presumption that inventory probably historically wasn't worth what somebody had it on their sheet for because it was old. Some engineer wouldn't accept it, whatever. That's changed now, but we aren't changing the minds of the surety companies and the banks and our credit partners as fast as the climate is changing. So just understand that if you're going to carry additional inventory on your balance sheet and in your company, you've got to be pretty well heeled and probably conversing pretty regularly within your team saying, what do we really need? What is something that's very commonly used across projects? Is this a very specific product or is this pipe bedding? We're going to use a lot of it. Let's just get it. It's widely used. It's not specialized. It's fairly homogeneous. We can pile it up versus this is a very specific application, rubber membrane. If we don't get those jobs this year, maybe we'll get them next year. Okay, well, think through that one because it's going to be a lot more difficult for the understanding of balance sheet utilization in that case versus like a pipe bedding, for example, or something like that. Finally, don't forget to call your insurance producer. Just make sure that you're not sitting on a whole pile of stuff and then, who knows, the storm from the century comes through and causes a bunch of flooding or hail. All of a sudden things are getting damaged and you're underinsured for the amount of inventory you're carrying around your yards. That's the last I'll ever say about insurance. I don't dabble in that at all. Let the insurance professionals do. So, next slide.
And make sure that you're communicating with the owner if you're going to be pre-ordering and storing materials, because what if there's a design change and now all of those materials that you've pre-ordered because you thought you were going to use are no longer going to be used with the new design. So just, again, collaborate, communicate, give notice so that you don't run into that situation where now you're sitting on a bunch of material that you can't actually install.
Yeah, and just to parrot just a little bit from what Tom said, I do think given today's climate, I think if you're more proactive in letting the Tom, Jim, Seth, Jakes of the world know and with the surety provider, giving forecasting to them why you're doing it for this season, I think all of that is helpful. Same thing with your banker, at least from discussions that we've had. Now we're a level or two removed, but we talked to some surety reps and sureties downstream off of that. But again, I think they are seeing just what you said. The original mindset was carried inventory because you ordered too much about 3 jobs ago, 2 years ago.
Yep.
That's a pass.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're trying to be proactive in today's market, it actually, if you can change the mindset to say, wait a minute, I shouldn't be getting penalized for this. I should get the gold star on this end,
Yep.
and at least get some, recognition that I'm doing
for it because I used to work for an electrical contractor when I was a younger pup. And,
I was gonna say, wait a minute.
When I was this
You
tall,
can't pull that. You cannot pull that on me.
This tall.
Yeah.
What do you do when you're the new guy, the summer help? You sort inventory. By sorting inventory, you're out in the job trailer that they've got stuff full of old electrical switchgear and wire and crap. Stuff that's never going to get used. Well, I've since seen the financial statement and I see the inventory line and I'm seeing what it's valued at. And I'm like, I sorted that shit. That ain't worth nothing. Nobody's ever going to buy that from you. Now they might actually.
Yeah.
But at that point, other places I go, I see the inventory. Other people say, oh, what's on this? Well, we had one group. It was all brand new equipment that was very homogeneous to be installed in all sorts of new residential construction. This person had a big division that handled that sort of stuff. Had a conversation. They said, those will all be gone. Probably turn it over 3 times this year. I'm like, can you show me? Sure. I'm like, well, Jesus Christ, those are all new in the box air conditioning units. Yeah, that's not a problem. We have no issue with something like that. It's a business sense. It's enterprise discussion amongst your team, and just share it with the people you're working with, and I think everybody's happy to see the smart moves happen. So I don't think there's any questions about that. On this one, payment for stockpile materials, I put an asterisk next to the NDOT one because I was going to see if there's any NDOT folks in here that wanted to reference anything. But just remember the number 3 bullet point, what we were joking about earlier before everybody walked in. There was a property law professor at Nebraska. Audrey was much smarter than I was, but we were there at the same time. She said, if you don't take anything out of this class, always remember, in the property law, you will never get anything you don't ask for. There's never going to be an owner, there's never going to be another side in a negotiation that's just going to say, hey, I think you should have this extra, okay? Yeah. So if you are holding materials for a job site, take the picture on your phone, include it with the billing, send it to, say, hey, can I get paid for this? It's isolated, it's insured. Even if it's not in your yard, maybe it's in somebody else's. Say, hey, can you cordon that off? Maybe you got some big gear that's going to go into a water section part of a job. Say, hey, go push that into a deal, shrink wrap it, put it on a pallet, take a bunch of pictures, send me a copy of your insurance certificate. I'm going to try and see if I can bill the owner, because we just need to keep that cash moving, because the supply house wants to get paid too. So just keep that cash flow mindset going.
Yeah, and even if they say no, so you ask for it and they say, no, we're not going to let you order this early, at least you've documented that you asked for it, because maybe saying no, now they've set it up where down the road, if it cost them $100,000 more than it would have cost them if you would have got to order when you asked for it, they failed to mitigate their damages. So now we have an extra argument that the owner had the opportunity to allow you to order it early. They told you no. So now they should be the one to accept this extra cost increase,
it's that
right?
toolkit.
So
we're just continuing to build the toolkit.
Yep.
And there's a lot of different ways this can go, and I know everybody's very creative in this room that can find out ways to make this stuff happen. So just what we're saying is build the toolkit, use the toolkit, discuss with the enterprise.
All right. We got the 3-minute warning, so
Okay.
just so you know. So we're just going to,
We started
We
late
started,
though.
yeah.
I
Yeah?
understand. I'm
Okay.
just getting, King's back
Perfect.
there, the big guy is telling me one of these. Now, that may be just me to stop
No,
talking
he
when he
was
does
saying
that.
me.
Oh, one of us.
Okay.
One
So
of-
we'll just move pretty quick then on a few of these, because there's a few really good general comments I think that we got. One of the things that we did at the Gene Lilly offices and talked to a number of our surety companies. They brought some really good information I want to be sure to reference. These qualification of bids, this contingency markup, enterprise risk, this is just what we were talking about earlier. There has got to be a discussion amongst your internal team saying, well, we want to bid this project, but if we can't get comfortable with something in the pricing, do we turn in a qualified bid? Now, you might be deemed non-responsive. That's something to discuss with your team. I think that's something to probably discuss with the owner ahead of time. Do we put a contingency markup in there? How much? Well, if they're not going to take a qualified bid, maybe we do mark up the shit out of something and turn it in, because we have to. There's no other choice. We'll never get a job if we sit here and try to stay on the sidelines and wait for a moment for each of us.
Right. All business judgment calls just want you to be aware of the risk before you make the call, right? The worst thing is you don't know the risk, so you can't price it.
Yep.
What we're trying to do is to make sure you understand the risk well enough, and you're going, Joel, I've been doing this for 50 years. I get it. That's all we do is bid risk. But these are some items that I think, and again, today's market, that I think there may be some other things going on out there that are actually, again, issues that we haven't had to face before. When you have actual transportation type issues that are causing problems, or production issues that we never thought would be there before. So
Yeah,
anyway.
and so even in materials, transportation, production, all these issues, some owners might say, well, I'll have materials for you because I know you're going to mark it up crazy on me. Sure, that's fine. Address it in the liquidated damages, though. If your materials don't show up on time, you can't charge me liquidated damages. And in fact, we're both parties to this contract. I'd like to charge you some liquidated damages, Mr. Owner, because you slowed me down. I couldn't get to another site. We didn't make as much money because we didn't get as much volume through the company.
And good luck with the second one there.
Yeah, good
just so you know.
Hire Joel for that one, though.
I'm happy to have Tom go do that. I just,
You'll
good luck
never
with
get
that
what
one
you
is
don't
all I'm
ask
saying.
for.
Yeah, if you don't ask for it,
You'll never
yeah,
get it. Owner directed, just, when you see owner directed materials in so many things, this item or of similar quality, make very sure you've referenced and discussed within your organization, the engineer, know who you're working with. I've seen one that we worked on together, and of similar quality. One of my clients put in a different product of similar quality. It had the same specifications. Guy ended up getting hometown because the hometown contractor didn't like what he was doing. and they said, well, you're going to have to tear that out and send it to this testing lab. It's already tested. It's already spec'd. Really? You tested that one. We'd like to see that one tested. So that's just one of those horror stories that goes, oh yeah, that could happen if you're in something you don't want to be involved in. But just that communication, collaboration, very important for even in an owner-directed stuff, saying, hey, if I can't get this, can we go to this item? Please, writing, send that to me in an email because we might use it and I don't want you to have a problem later. So, this one. So this one is a very important thing that's actually really popping up right now. This is one of our surety company friends that brought this up and said, hey, I'd love to make this an interesting topic for people to think about. Warranty timelines. If you close out a job, you got a 1-year warranty timeline. Some owners are asking for crazy 3s and 5s and all these numbers that are way bigger than they should be because contractors shouldn't have to be warranties. Contractors should be construction. If they accepted the construction as it was built, an offer of a warranty I think is fair. I think it's reasonable. I think it's what we want to do. But if you had priced a job 3 years ago and you accrued a little bit of back pocket money for warranty, going, yeah, we're going to have to go fix them. There'll be a crack in the concrete, there'll be a chip, something, still a call for something. The price of that is exponentially higher now to do than ever previously thought it could have been. So going forward, I don't know what the perfect answer is here, but I do know that that's something that's popping up is owners are saying, hey, I want you to come fix this warranty work. Thanks. We can't even get to the jobs we're on right now, and stuff is so expensive. I never thought I'd be spending what I'm spending to go fix little follow-ups and callbacks. It can just get absolutely crazy compared to what we once thought it was. So I don't know if there's an avenue in saying, at least if you're going to ask for a 3-year warranty, I got to be able to have a fair shot at a price escalation arrangement, because if you won't do it in the job contract but you want this long warranty, give me a chance to price stuff differently in the warranty on the growth.
Yeah, I think, again, it goes to part of the communication of here's what a 1-year runs, here's what a 3-year runs. If you want to take price escalation risk off the table, okay, right? Again, conversations, but otherwise it's pricing the contingency, and it gets back to how much contingency does an owner want or thinks going to be out there for accepting. I mean, and I realize it's still a tight market, all that, but I think owners are starting to see that the teams available to do the job, particularly with labor the way it is, it's becoming harder to get the jobs done that they need done. I'm telling you, I believe it is. And so I think there is some room, again, for upfront, realistic dialogue. It's not going to be all one-sided in your favor, but I think the more you can have, the better off it is, and the better off when things like we're just seeing come along. So.
Yeah, no, and I think that kind of, really is summarized. As last 2 slides are just general comments that are pretty well summaries of what we've been talking about. The communication, cooperation, and coordination. I'm going to jump back 1 slide just real quick. And then, the best practices, project selection. I keep hearing about the work that's out there. We got to be picky because we're 10 men short, we're 20 guys short, we're 3 crews short. Well, if there's a preferred owner, maybe that's the time you go to them and say, hey, I can get you a start date and I can get you timelines. Let's work together on this because I don't want to go get tangled up with those guys because they are not very nice. And maybe that's saying, hey, this is a great opportunity to be choosy on what we do, just because with the inflation going like this, supply chain issues, we don't want to get out in a dangerous spot with a tough owner who's going to hold some checks or do some stuff that's going to say, no, I think we're going to fight this one out. Oh, great. So good job, bad terms. It's not a good job. It's a bad job. And then finally, the visibility of your supply chain. Are you talking to your normal suppliers saying, hey, how are you guys doing? Let me tell you, we're not doing that great because we have the same problems you're having, everybody's having. But thank you, it's that communication that goes on there. So we can jump to the next one. Finally, it's that single supplier dependency, natural hazards, global impacts, all these type of things. We all know, everybody gets it, but it's summarized at the bottom there. I think Beth said that the focus needs to always be on effective management decisions, and effective management decisions should lead to profitable decisions, because this whole thing is done to make the enterprise money. And if it's not a profitable decision, you've got to really readdress what are we doing, how do we address it, how do we move forward to continue to stay profitable, because that's the number one insulator against all these type of issues. Is if you're profitable, got a lot of financial ability, that's all you can really do. It's the best tool in the tool chest. Take a big checkbook, I guess.
Yeah, and everything we've said here is to try to get out in front of an issue. That's what we're trying to do, both on jobs you're looking at as well as jobs you're in. I would, take the hard look and try to get in front of it, and then communicate what do you see that risk analysis looking like, particularly for current deliverables that are still out there, and again for the jobs that are ongoing. It's tough. It's tough. But the more communication you can have up front in telling them this is, and again, if it was ongoing and if it's a combination of what's taken place already, force majeure may at least buy you some time, and in light of, again, current communications from administration, again, it's supposedly going to come back down, right? We can all argue about that later, but I'm telling you, at least for a position of trying to say why it may be a force majeure event, and at least you get time, could be because of that. So I would look hard at those kind of things. But for the jobs you haven't started yet, this is something you should grab a hold of and take seriously, because I may be skeptical about how much the pattern's going to come down and how quick it's going to come down.
Yeah,
so these are real issues.
Yeah, I think in recap, probably the most important thing to take away is the communication of the price savings clause and escalation clause. Anything you can do to share that concept with your owners going forward, saying this is the type of stuff we're going to have to do because it's going to just eat us all up out here. This isn't going to stop this year. If inflation were to turn around this year, I'd be shocked. And if all of a sudden 1,000 truck drivers fell out of the sky and said, boy, I'd love to deliver material for you, I'd say, well, boy, we're fortunate because we needed it. Yeah. And so I think in recap, that's just to have a big balance sheet if you possibly can. And
I would like that too.
I would like
if
that.
you had time,
Yeah.
if you'd give me that.
I'd have to find it. But
Okay.
we'll rob a bank
All
or
right.
something. But and then really that contracting model.
So yeah, that's what we got. Questions? Anybody? Tom answers the difficult ones. Audrey answers the very difficult ones. And
burning
I know
questions.
where you can put your money. So try to no. All right, we'll
Thank
be
you.
around. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.